Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody.
Evening.
Good evening.
Uh-oh, it's going to be one of those crowds. My name is Fiona. I'd like to make you all very welcome this evening. Just a quick housekeeping message. This is a chance for you now to turn your phones to silent. Do feel free to use as much social media as you would like to. You'll find both John and Andrew very active on Twitter, and also the publishers of Andrew's fine book are also on Twitter, as is Avid Reader. Okay, let's see. So it's a great pleasure and great honour for us to be launching Andrew's book tonight, Talking Smack. We've been following Andrew's career quite closely for a few years now, and so we were very proud and delighted to be asked to launch his book. We were even more proud when we found out that John Birmingham was going to come and do the honours for us. John Birmingham is a passionate author, journalist and gourmand.
That's what you're going to say. Drug addict.
Now, what you did in privacy of Bulimba stays in Bulimba. But we are very pleased that John chooses to live in Brisbane as well. The format for this evening is these guys will have a chat, and there'll be time for questions, and then of course there'll be a signing. We'll have Andrew in the window signing copies of his new book. Can I ask you to join me in welcoming Andrew and John?
So, Dope Plan, mate, that's a good book, isn't it?
Yeah, you did well with that.
No, you did better, actually. You should go, after we finish up, you should go read this book, because I always resist these events. I greeted them and there's so much to do. And then I started reading Andrew's book and I just, gobbled most of it up in one sitting, I'm afraid. It's awesome. Why don't you tell us what it is? How the idea came to you and how you went about doing it.
Yeah, I wanted to write a book, but I needed permission to do that first. I've been reading books as long as I've been breathing, essentially. My father's a librarian, and from the youngest age I was reading books on a regular basis. But I started writing as a journalist about 5 years ago and slowly built up a portfolio of ideas. I started in music and gradually spread out into kind of a wide range, a general approach to journalism, feature journalism. And I thought around this time when the publisher approached me, Alexandra Payne, my publisher at University of Queensland Press, had been following my career for a while, and she said that she was going to ask me to write a music book, but by that point I had written about such a wide range of things. She wasn't sure. She just said, do you want to write a book, essentially? And I went back, well, I said yes initially, then I went back and thought about what I might like to do. And at that time in my life, I had started experimenting with recreational drugs, which is something that I had avoided quite studiously up until that point in my life. I had abused alcohol from my mid-teens, as many Australians do. I'd smoked a few joints here and there during college, but everything else scared the shit out of me, basically. But around that time in 2012, when Alex approached me, I was experimenting cautiously with other things, and I was becoming more fascinated with something that I had thought wasn't for me, or that was for losers and villains and evil people who decide to take things that aren't government-sanctioned drugs or government-regulated drugs.
So you reckon it was the music writing background that led you down the particular path? For those of you who don't know, the book is a bunch of really quite fascinating interviews and sort of almost profile interviews, really, of musicians talking about their actually, some of them aren't talking about their drug use, aren't they? Some of them are actually quite straight and quite clean, and they talk about the pressures of being in an industry where everyone around them is ripped off their nut. But the book, yeah, it's how many musicians?
14 interviews.
Yeah. So was it your background working for Street Press and Music Mag that made you think that'd be worth doing?
Yeah, I wanted to. Well, I've been a long-term music fan, obviously writing about music as a professional, but yeah, I guess I wanted to look at the intersection between drugs and music. And so some of the people who I approached for the book I had spoken to before, through my work for magazines and websites, but many of them I hadn't met before, didn't know me from a bag of dog shit. They got my response, they got my request to talk to them.
How'd you do that? Like, I mean, some I imagine you front it up, but others you go through like management and...
Well, yeah, they were all email requests. It wasn't meeting someone at a gig and like bailing them up backstage and saying, "Hey mate,
you got drugged, dude."
No. So yeah, I was very, I guess, professional in that sense. I kind of said that I explained briefly my history of being afraid of drugs, and then coming to understand that it's quite sensationalized and hysteria-led. And so I emailed the request through to either them directly or their management, and we went from there.
Did you find yourself when you were approaching them in a sort of vomity confessional mode, like, you know, look, I've used a shitload of drugs myself, and yada yada yada, and you know, the media, oh my god, the fucking media sucks, and I just want to set straight, and you know, I won't fuck you, honestly.
Have you been listening to my recordings? It's eerie.
I can just imagine. One of the difficulties when you do work like this is you come to it not just with your own history, and Andrew's got a very impressive history as a freelance writer. The pool of successful freelancers in Australia is quite small, and we tend to keep the side eye on each other very closely. Because, you know, he might be taking my feed one day. He's well capable of doing it, but one of the things that you have to put up with when you do this kind of work is the crap job that other people have done. And did you hit resistance because of the poor performance of the mass media on this issue?
To an extent, yeah. The first person to say yes to my request was Phil Jamison from Grinspoon, and he had essentially been fucked over by the mainstream media because his face and story appeared on the front cover of the Daily Telegraph with the headline, "Stars Ice Hell," after it was leaked to the paper that he was in detox for crystal methamphetamine addiction. So from that point on, he was on the back foot defending his story. He no longer had control of it. It was something he was trying to keep private between him and his family and his bandmates. This is the singer from Grinspoon, and from there he was on the back foot defending himself. So a few months after that, he appeared on Enough Rope, Andrew Denton's program, to kind of explain himself in his own words, which he felt he had to do because it had just been taken from him. It was no longer his story, it was something that he had to defend. So with the book, I think he was the first one to say yes, and this is probably the last time he's going to talk about it, to be honest, because he's had a shit time being portrayed as this villain for deciding to use a drug, which he then became addicted to for a short period of time. So yeah, I had a lot of resistance from, I drew up a long list of like 100 musicians that I wanted to talk to, and many of them said no, or never got back to me, or their management kept me at arm's length, but ultimately 14 had, I don't know if courage is the right word, but the interest enough to talk about this topic frankly, which is pretty rare, I think.
And can you recall off the top of your head who they are?
Aren't they on this poster? Oh no, there you go. Paul Kelly, Tina Arena, Gautier, Steve Kilby, Holly Throsby, Earthboy, Mick Harvey, John Toogood, Bertie Blackman, plus more.
Plus more. Did you? One of the things I found as I was reading it was that I got the feeling that certain thematic patterns began to emerge. Did you feel that at all when you were putting it together?
It's hard to say because what I found...
I know that you very determinedly did them as separate pieces, so that each person got their own voice and their own story, I guess. But you do see, I felt that you did see, there was patterns that came again and again. Like one of the things that was interesting is like we come at these people, we come at their public personas, and part of the public personas is the drug use and the wildlife. But I was quite surprised at the number of them who, like you, had gone into the biz clean and drifted into the drug use later on. And,
yeah, that's right. Bertie Blackman had an interesting point on that. She is an indie pop singer based in Melbourne. Her father is Charles Blackman, quite a well-known visual artist who has since developed alcoholic dementia. And Bertie herself, in her early career, found herself slipping into alcoholism essentially because she was playing late shows late at night, arriving at venues in the mid-afternoon. Not much else to do in the 6 hours in between, but sit around and drink. She found so.
And also, she was quite honest about feeling the pressure to play the role of the gnarly rock singer.
The image, yeah.
Even though people in the band around her just wanted to get to work and play the gig and go home and go to bed because they got a meeting with their accountant the next morning, didn't necessarily want to encourage that.
Yeah, I think we as a society, whether it's through pop culture or through the media, we tend to expect certain things of our rock stars and pop stars. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to look at this particular creative industry with the book, because we kind of expect them to be living these lives of wild excess and hedonism and perhaps doing things that we ourselves can't do if we are living 9-to-5 existences.
And there's the other element too, isn't there? Is that the sort of creative amplification, which you touched on at the start of the book. Was it the Bill Hicks quote saying that, if you're against drugs, you may as well just burn all your records now. So that
because all the people who enhance your lives through creating that music, they were real fucking high on drugs too.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a joke, obviously.
It is a joke.
Painting with a broad brush.
But I mean, it's if you go through the Steve Kilbey interview, he talks about the quite profound effect that his drug use had on one particular album. Was it Priest?
Priest equals Aura, 1992. Yeah.
That's one of the, for someone like me who doesn't really understand music, that was a fascinating interview to read because he lays out step by step how the drug use affected what went into the album and what's going into your ears years later on if you're reading it. But then on the other hand, you get a very definite impression from quite a few of the people you interviewed that it fucked them as well. Like it didn't help the creativity at all.
It's a pretty delicate balance to try and find ultimately. Those who I spoke to who used drugs successfully, quote unquote, were those who seem to be able to keep a distinction between their work and their recreation. I'm thinking of people like Earthboy and Ian Hogue from Powderfinger and Holly Throsby, people for whom drugs were something to do on the weekend, perhaps, rather than midday on a Thursday or something like that.
Okay. Did you come to any conclusions at the end, like a sort of a systemic conclusion that the drugs do help, or it really just does come down to the individual?
Well, Paul Kelly said something interesting, which is he used heroin recreationally for about 20 years, is how he tells it, which is something that you don't hear very often with heroin. Usually it's a drug of extremes. You either become addicted and overdose